You know that moment when you realize something is completely wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on what? That's how I felt when I arrived at that year's family reunion. I was excited, thrilled to see everyone again after so long apart, but from the moment I set foot in my grandmother's house, something in the air was different, heavy, strained. People greeted me, yes, but with a forced smile. That kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes, you know? Conversations were abruptly interrupted when I approached. Cousins who had always been close to me suddenly had an urgent need to go to the bathroom or help in the kitchen. Uncles looked away. Even the children who normally surrounded me asking to play seemed to have been instructed to keep their distance. I confess that at first I tried to ignore it. I thought maybe it was just my imagination, paranoia, I don't know. Maybe I was projecting some insecurity. But the more the day went on, the more obvious it became. Everyone knew something about me, and they had clearly decided to leave me out. I tried to strike up a conversation with my closest cousin, the one with whom I always shared secrets. She could barely look at me, made up a weak excuse, and ran away. My own brother, who never hid anything from me, changed the subject when I tried to ask if everything was all right. The feeling of exclusion was suffocating. Then came dinner time. Everyone gathered in the large room, that traditional gathering where we tell stories, laugh at the same old jokes, and someone inevitably pulls out a guitar. But this time, something different was planned. My uncle announced that he had prepared a special slideshow. A surprise for the whole family, he said, in a tone of voice I couldn't decipher. The lights went out. The projector was turned on, and in the first few seconds of images projected onto the white wall, with all the family's eyes alternating between the screen and my face, I finally understood. I understood why no one could look me in the eye. I understood the whispers. I understood the discomfort. And in that moment, with my heart racing and my hands sweating, my world turned upside down. What appeared on that screen wasn't just a revelation. It was the explanation for everything, and it would forever change how I saw my family, my history, and myself. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happened that night taught me lessons about family, secrets, and truth that I never imagined I would need to learn. To fully understand the impact of that moment, I need to take you back a few weeks. The family reunion took place every year at my grandmother's house, a tradition we had religiously maintained for decades. We were a large family, one of those noisy and warm ones, where everyone meddles in everyone else's life, but always with love. At least that's how I saw it. I had spent the last 3 years living in another city for work. It wasn't that we were fighting or estranged, but the distance had naturally created a space. Video calls on birthdays, messages in WhatsApp groups, that kind of contact. So, when I finally managed to take time off to be present at that year's reunion, I was genuinely excited, counting down the days, actually. I bought presents for everyone. I planned to arrive early to help with the preparations. I even mentally rehearsed the stories I would tell about my life in the big city. I missed that familiar warmth, the smell of Grandma's cooking, the unfiltered laughter, the tight hugs. You know how it is, right? That feeling of belonging that only family can give. The trip was uneventful. Throughout the journey, I exchanged messages in the family group chat, letting them know I was arriving, making jokes. The replies were short, different from usual, but I didn't think much about it at the time. I attributed it to the rush of preparations. When I parked in front of the house, I could already hear the noise from inside. Music, voices, that characteristic festive atmosphere. I took a deep breath, smiled, and opened the door. "I'm here," I announced loudly, expecting the usual warm welcome. What happened was nothing. Well, not exactly nothing. People looked, some murmured, "Hi." My mother came to give me a hug that was a little too quick, but that celebratory moment I was expecting simply didn't come. Nobody stopped what they were doing to properly greet me. Nobody asked to see pictures of my new life. Nobody asked those typical intrusive questions that families always ask. I tried not to show that I had noticed. I went inside, put my things in the guest room, and went back to the living room. I offered to help in the kitchen. My aunt said she didn't need it. I tried to strike up a conversation about football with my cousins. The conversation died in seconds. I grabbed a beer and went to sit in the backyard, where the best conversations usually happen. But as soon as I approached the group that was there, the subject changed abruptly. Have you ever had that feeling that you're the topic of conversation, but when you show up, everyone pretends they were talking about the weather? That's exactly what happened. And it was happening repeatedly, in every room of the house, with every group of relatives. The worst part was when I went to the bathroom, and on my way back, I walked down the hallway and heard my own mother whispering to my aunt, "He doesn't know yet. Let's wait for the right moment." I froze. Doesn't know what? The right moment for what? I thought about confronting them right then and there, but something held me back. Fear, maybe. Or that part of us that prefers not to confirm what we already suspect. The whole day was like that. A constant exercise in trying to act normally while feeling like I was in an episode of Twilight Zone. I smiled when I should have, laughed at the jokes, helped tidy the table, but inside I was freaking out. My head wouldn't stop, racing. What did I do? Did they find out something about me? Am I sick and nobody wants to tell me? Did someone die and they didn't tell me? The possibilities were endless and all terrifying, and the worst part, having no one to talk to about it. Normally, I would call my brother or that close cousin, but they were clearly part of whatever was happening. I was alone, surrounded by family, but completely isolated. If you've ever been through something similar, you know how agonizing it is. It's a specific, painful loneliness that only happens when the people who should be your safe haven suddenly seem like strangers. After dinner, when I thought the worst was over, and that maybe I could leave the next day without further confrontation, my uncle asked for everyone's attention. He had a laptop in his hand and a projector was already set up, pointing at the white wall of the main room. "Everyone, I've prepared something special for today," he announced with a smile that tried to look cheerful but came out a little crooked. Everyone started to settle in. Chairs were dragged around. Children sat on the floor. The main light was turned off. I stood there, unsure of where to position myself. I ended up standing sideways, leaning against the wall, from where I had a view of both the screen and the people. My stomach was already churning, that intuition that tells you something important is about to happen. The first images were normal, old family photos. My grandmother when she was young, my grandfather who had already passed away, weddings, baptisms, those yellowed photos that every family has. People laughed, commented, "Look how skinny you were. Wow, what awful clothes." That kind of nostalgic comment. I tried to relax. Maybe that was all it was. A typical family slideshow. But then the images started to change tone. More recent photos. And I realized there was a narrative being built. It wasn't just a random collection of memories. It had a timeline, a purpose. Photos of me started appearing more frequently. Me as a baby, a child, a teenager, but interspersed with photos of someone else I didn't recognize. My heart started racing. Who was that man in the photos? He appeared at barbecues, birthday parties, always somewhat off to the side, always with a discreet smile. In some photos, he was next to my parents. In others, he was holding children. He was holding me, a baby, in his lap. The room fell silent, not that comfortable silence of someone admiring. Old photographs. It was a heavy, oppressive, expectant silence. I felt all eyes turned to me, even in the dim light. My breath caught in my throat. Then a photo appeared that made me stumble. It was me, about 5 or 6 years old, holding that man's hand in a park. I was smiling, looking up at him, with that expression of pure admiration that children have. And he looked back with undeniable affection in his eyes. It wasn't a photo of strangers. It was a photo of father and son. But my father was sitting in the living room on the other side, alive, present. The man who raised me, who had always been my father, was there. So who the hell was that in the photos? The answer came in the next image. It was a certificate, projected huge on the wall for everyone to see. My birth certificate, but not the one I knew. It was an old, original version. And there, in the father field, was not the name of the man I had called father all my life. It was the name of the man in the photos, Roberto Silva. The world stopped. I literally felt like the ground had been pulled out from under my feet. My vision blurred at the edges. Sounds became muffled. That phenomenon you see in movies and think is exaggerated, but that really happens when your brain can't process information. Roberto Silva, my biological father, a man I didn't know, or rather I didn't remember knowing him, but who had clearly been a part of my childhood. The photos proved it. He was there. And then he disappeared from my life. Why? How? When? My mother began to cry softly. My father, the man who raised me, placed his hand on her shoulder. My brother, whom I now understood to be my half-brother, had his head down. My grandmother looked at me with a mixture of compassion and guilt that broke my heart. More photos. Roberto teaching me how to ride a bicycle. Roberto on my 4th birthday. Roberto waving from a car in a photo that was clearly a farewell. And then, no more photos of him. The visual narrative ended there. He simply disappeared from my story. The last image in the slideshow was devastating in its simplicity. A recent photo, taken from an obituary. Roberto Silva had passed away 3 months ago, and I had no idea, because I didn't know he existed, because my entire family had decided to erase him from my memory, from my life, from my history. The date was there, in the projected obituary. August 15th, a 54-year-old man. Cause of death, cancer. Survivors, a sister, nephews, and a son. But my name wasn't there, because he probably couldn't mention me either. What was the agreement? What kind of situation had separated this man from me? The lights came back on. Nobody moved. Nobody knew what to say. And there I was, standing, processing that my entire identity, everything I thought I knew about my origins, was incomplete. There was a huge piece of my story that had been deliberately hidden from me, and the person who could tell me their side of the story was dead, buried 3 months ago, while I lived my happy and ignorant life in another city. The next few minutes were a blur. I remember leaving the room, going out to the backyard, needing air, my hands trembling, my heart racing, that physical sensation of shock that takes over the whole body. I sat on the porch steps, head in my hands, trying to organize thoughts that refused to make sense. People started to leave, one by one, respecting my space, but also clearly unsure how to approach the situation. Some patted me on the shoulder in silence. Others whispered an empty, sorry. Sorry for what exactly? For hiding it? For revealing it? For him dying? For me existing? My mother was the first to really talk to me. She sat beside me, respected my silence for a few minutes, and then began to speak. Her voice trembled, heavy with guilt and old pain. "I should have told you sooner," were her first words. And then the whole story began to unfold. She and Roberto had met young, fallen intensely in love, and had a tumultuous relationship. I was conceived during a reconciliation, but soon after they separated definitively. Roberto had serious problems. She mentioned addictions, financial instability, cycles of promises and disappointments. When I was born, he tried to be present, but intermittently and chaotically. That's when she met the man I always called Dad. He fell in love with her, with me, and wanted to build a family. He offered stability, consistent love, a real home. Roberto, realizing he couldn't offer the same and genuinely wanting what was best for me, agreed to step aside. It wasn't a cruel legal battle. It was a painful but conscious decision by all the adults involved. "He loved you," my mother said, tears streaming down her face. "He loved you so much that he agreed to leave your life so that you could have a better one. And your father, the man who raised you, loved you so much that he adopted you as his own son, never making any distinction between you and your brother. The adoption had been formalized when I was 7 years old. That's why I didn't remember Roberto. My childhood memory had been kind in erasing what it didn't understand. Or perhaps they had helped me forget, without me realizing it. Photos were put away, conversations were avoided, and gradually, Roberto Silva became a ghost in my own story. Why didn't they tell me when I was growing up, was all I could manage to ask. My voice came out hoarse, broken. Why let me find out like this? She didn't have a good answer. Nobody did. The truth is, time passed. The lie solidified, and telling became increasingly difficult. How do you reveal something like that? When is the right time? Is there even a right time? They kept postponing it, until Roberto got sick. And even then, they didn't tell me. They decided I didn't need to know, that it wouldn't make a difference. But it did. It made all the difference in the world. My father, the man who raised me, approached. He sat on the other side. He looked at me with those eyes I knew so well, full of love and now also of fear. Fear of losing me. "You are my son," he said firmly. "You always have been. Nothing changes that." I was there for every doctor's appointment, every soccer game, every graduation. I chose you. Every day I chose you. And it was true. He had been there. Roberto wasn't. And part of me understood the logic, the rationality behind the decisions made. But another part, a deep and primal part, felt betrayed, robbed of a fundamental truth about who I was. The following hours were filled with fragmented conversations. Uncles and aunts came, each offering their memories of Roberto. I discovered that some still maintained occasional contact with him over the years, that he asked about me, that he had photos of me, probably obtained through these relatives who served as a silent bridge, that he never married, never had other children, that at the end of his life, on his deathbed, he had asked them to tell me. He had even left a letter for me, written by a man I didn't know but who was my father. A man who died 3 months ago while I was laughing in some big city bar, completely oblivious to the fact that half of my genetic code was ceasing to exist in the world. My uncle went to get the letter, a yellow envelope, slightly crumpled, with my name written in handwriting I'd never seen before, but which strangely seemed familiar. I held the envelope for long minutes, unable to open it. What do you say to a son who doesn't know you? How do you explain an absence of decades? How do you say goodbye to someone who doesn't even know they should miss you? When I finally opened and read it, I found the words of a broken but not bitter man. He apologized not for abandoning me, but for not being strong enough to stay. He described the impossible love he felt when he first held me, and the impossible love that made him let go. He recounted how he had followed my life from afar, proud of each achievement, as if he were a secret fan of my existence. And he ended by asking not that I forgive him. He didn't think he deserved forgiveness, but that I not hate the life he helped me have by walking away from it. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the night flipping through old photo albums my mother brought, looking at pictures that now had a different meaning. That man in the corner, slightly out of focus in the background of birthday photos. It was him. It had always been him. Present but erased. Part of my story, but edited out of it. The days and weeks that followed that revelation were perhaps the most difficult of my life. I returned to my city in a state of shock, unable to fully process the earthquake that had shaken my identity. Who was I now? My entire story needed to be rewritten, every memory recontextualized, every certainty questioned. I went through all the stages of grief, because that's what it was. Grief. Grief for a father I never consciously knew, but who apparently knew me. Grief for the version of my story that I thought was true. Grief for the lost opportunity to ask questions, seek answers, perhaps even build some kind of relationship, however complicated. The anger came on strong. Anger at my parents for hiding it. Anger at the whole family for being complicit in decades of lies. Anger at Roberto for giving up, even though I rationally understood why. Anger at myself for not realizing there were holes in the narrative of my life. Small inconsistencies that I always ignored because it was easier, more comfortable not to question them. I sought therapy. I needed a neutral space to unpack all of that, and it was in those sessions, talking aloud about the absurdity of the situation, that I began to understand deeper layers of the story. I understood that there were no clear villains here. There were only imperfect people trying to do the best they could with the emotional tools they had. My mother was young, scared, wanting to protect her son. Roberto was a broken man who made the most selfless choice he could. My father, and I still call him father because titles are earned through presence, not genetics, loved a child who wasn't biologically his as if he were. And me? I was a child who grew into an adult carrying a truth I didn't know. I started researching Roberto, Thanks to the internet and some relatives who were willing to fill in the gaps, I put together a portrait of the man. I discovered that he had worked in construction, that he played the guitar, something I've always enjoyed too. Genetics or coincidence? That he had a sarcastic sense of humor, that he struggled with addiction his whole life with more defeats than victories, but that he never stopped trying. I visited his grave. It was surreal to be there, standing before a tombstone, with a name that was half the reason for my existence, speaking in a low voice to someone who couldn't answer. I brought flowers. I cried. I apologized for not knowing, for not being able to be there, for existing in a way that made everything so complicated. But the biggest transformation came when I finally managed to have an honest and deep conversation with my father, the man who raised me. Without defensiveness, without accusations, just two men trying to navigate an impossible situation. He cried, something I had rarely seen. He confessed his fears of losing me, that finding out about Roberto would make me love him less. He confessed his guilt at having been complicit in erasing someone from my history. "You didn't lose me," I said. "And Roberto wasn't erased either. He was always here." I touched my chest. "He's in the shape of my nose, which doesn't look like yours. He's in my stubbornness, which my mother says isn't hers. He's in the part of me that always made me feel a little different, even without knowing why. He's here, and you are too. We both fit." And that was the most important lesson. Identity is not a zero-sum equation. Acknowledging Roberto didn't diminish the man who raised me. Loving the memory of one didn't mean betraying the other. I could carry both. I could honor the sacrifice of one and the dedication of the other. I could be the son of two men of completely different ways and be lucky for it, not unlucky. I also learned about the weight of secrets in families, how they corrode, create distance, build invisible walls, how many families carry unspoken truths, waiting for the right moment that never comes. How many stories are edited, sanitized, hidden under the rug in the name of protection, when in reality they only postpone the pain? The truth hurts, yes, but lies, even well-intentioned ones, corrode. And when they are finally exposed, they hurt even more because they come accompanied by betrayal, wasted time, and questions that can never be answered. I began to make peace with my family. It wasn't instant. It wasn't easy. There were difficult conversations, tears, tense moments. But gradually we rebuilt bridges. I understood that they too were victims of circumstance, trapped in a lie that had grown so large it was too big to be easily undone. And I found a certain peace in honoring Roberto in small ways. I learned the songs he used to play on the guitar. I donated to drug rehabilitation centers in his name. I talked to his sister, my aunt whom I didn't know, and discovered that I have cousins who grew up hearing about me just as I never heard about them. Today, almost a year after that family reunion that changed everything, I would say I am a different person. More complete, paradoxically, for having discovered that I was incomplete. More compassionate towards the imperfections and impossible choices that people face. More aware that family stories are always more complicated than they seem. So, here we are. At the end of this story that began with a room full of family avoiding me and ended with a completely new understanding of who I am. If you've made it this far, thank you for joining me on this journey. I know it was heavy, emotionally charged, perhaps even uncomfortable at times, but I share this because I deeply believe that our stories, especially the complicated ones, the imperfect ones, the ones without the traditional happy ending, are the ones that most need to be told. We live in a world of perfect facades, of families that seem to have everything figured out, of stories edited for public consumption. But reality is always messier. The reality is that families keep secrets, that identity is fluid and complicated, that love comes in forms that don't fit into simple definitions, that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and remembering doesn't mean being stuck, that you can carry multiple truths at the same time, even when they seem contradictory. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see a composition. I see Roberto's nose, my mother's eyes, the posture of the man who taught me to ride a bicycle. Or was it Roberto who taught me first? I don't remember, and that's okay. I see my whole story, including the chapters that were hidden, and I choose to embrace it all. I still have difficult days, moments when the anger returns, when I catch myself thinking, what if? What if they had told me sooner? What if Roberto had managed to stay clean and present? What if I had had the chance to know him as an adult? But I've learned not to live in the realm of what if, the past. Happened the way it happened. I can't change it. I can only choose how to carry it forward, and I choose to carry this burden with compassion. Compassion for everyone involved, including myself. Compassion for the younger version of my mother who made impossible decisions. For Roberto, who loved in the only way he knew how. For my father, who faced his fears every day to be present. And for myself, who am learning that being human means living among imperfect truths and still finding meaning, purpose, and love. If there's one message I'd like you to take away from this story, it's this. Hidden truths always come to light. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And the longer they remain hidden, the more painful the revelation. If you're keeping a secret that affects people you love, strongly consider finding the courage to reveal it carefully and lovingly. You can't control how they'll react, but you can control whether they find out from you or from circumstances. And if you're someone who has discovered a hidden truth about your own history, as I have, know that it's okay not to be okay. It's okay to feel anger, confusion, betrayal. It's okay to take time to process. There's no timeline for healing from something like this. But also know that on the other side of this process lies the possibility of a deeper understanding, a richer identity, a more complete story. You don't have to choose between versions of your truth. You can be everything at once. You can honor what was and build what will be. You can carry memories of people you barely knew and still feel them as part of you. You can redefine family in terms that make sense for your reality, not for social expectations. Regarding that family reunion, we had another one this year, and it was different, lighter, but also deeper. There were no more elephants in the room, no. There were more hidden truths, at least not about me. We talked openly about Roberto. I told him stories I had discovered about him. We laughed at bizarre similarities between us, and for the first time, I felt completely present, completely seen, completely whole. So thank you for listening. Thank you for making room for this complicated and imperfect story. And remember, your story, however messy it may be, is worthy of being known, honored, and lived in its entirety. All the chapters, even the ones that were hidden, especially the ones that were hidden. Did this story resonate with you? I'd love to know. In the Kiao comments below, tell me, have you ever discovered a hidden truth about your family or your own history? How did you deal with it? Or perhaps you're someone who's keeping a secret and doesn't know how to reveal it. Let's create a safe space here to share these experiences. We're not alone in this. If this story touched you in any way, leave a like, so I know it's worthwhile to continue sharing real and vulnerable stories like this one. Subscribe to the channel for more content about family, relationships, personal growth, and the beautiful complications of being human. And if you know someone who is going through something similar, who has discovered something about their origins, or is dealing with family secrets, share this video with that person. Sometimes, knowing that we are not alone makes all the difference. Turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos, because next week I'll be talking about how to rebuild family trust after major revelations. It's a topic I learned through experience, and that can help a lot of people. And remember, your complete story, with all its chapters, is what makes you unique. Embrace it, all of it. See you in the next video. Until then, take care of yourself.